Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. As you'll be more than aware, I am regularly producing biopic style videos providing in-depth coverage on various different characters from the exciting world of Street Fighter. Now everyone we have looked at thus far on here have been featured in Street Fighter 2. However, today's athlete, if we want to call him that, has been heavily requested to receive his own video on here, despite not appearing in the most well-known game in the series. On the surface, for those who picked up a Street Fighter Alpha game without any knowledge of the new characters, they would most likely have yawned at Dan for his generic gi-wearing appearance. After all, the Street Fighter series was already full of karate bums who both thought and dressed very similarly. So all us gamers needed was another one of these, right? Well, first impressions can be deceiving, as not only is Dan one of the most funny characters in the Street Fighter canon, but he has some of the greatest character development in the history of the franchise. So join me today as we go back and appreciate this man's fighting game career and look at all of his other various appearances over the years. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the at times hysterical story of Dan Hibiki. Yeah. After the huge success of Street Fighter 2 in 1991, as we all now know, Capcom would milk its success with revamped iteration after revamped iteration, continuing to build on the quality of the game. In 1995 though, 4 years after the release of Street Fighter 2, gamers would finally be introduced to Street Fighter Alpha, a brand new title that would act chronologically as the story bridge between Street Fighter 2 and the 1987 original. This would mean gamers would be treated to a roster mixing characters from both games together, as well as adding some completely new ones to the mix. Amongst these, we of course would get Dan Hibiki, a fighter with a similar outfit to Ryu and Ken with a fighting stance to match, which is of no surprise whatsoever when we consider that he originates as a palette swap of these two. It is said that Dan was first created as a tongue-in-cheek joke, poking fun at Capcom's fighting game rival company SNK. You see, shortly after the release of Street Fighter 2, one of the fighting games that SNK would produce would be Art of Fighting, a game that starred two characters known as Ryo Sakazaki and Robert Garcia, with Capcom taking note that Ryo just seemed like a direct cross between Ryu and Ken. So in the most humorous retaliation possible, Capcom thought, why not with Street Fighter Alpha, create a character who is a direct cross between Ryo and Robert Garcia, of course resulting in Dan Hibiki, a secret character who would appear in the first ever Alpha game. Dan would wear a traditional gi with a black undershirt like Ryo, but take the hairstyle and facial features of Robert. While Dan's outfit is bright pink as opposed to Ryu's orange, supplementary material suggests Dan's gi was only accidentally turned pink due to unintentionally mixing colours whilst doing his laundry. This sort of comical blunder though is only scratching the surface when it comes to Dan's ridiculousness. In combat, Dan utilises a Seikyo style of fighting, which translates as either the strongest or ultimate fighting style. This is Dan's very own custom martial arts style that he created himself via mixing several others together. Due to this, many consider Dan a jack of all trades yet a master of none, unless of course we classify taunting as the man's greatest skill, another joke that was placed in the Alpha series poking fun at taunting within Art of Fighting. It is said that Dan's lack of specialisation in a particular combat skill, paired with his own exuberant overconfidence, makes Dan incredibly weak in comparison to other fighters from the Street Fighter series. For this reason, most people look at Dan as somewhat of a joke of a fighter with a slow, clumsy arsenal of mostly short-ranged moves. In fact, due to this reason, when playing competitively, most would strongly advise against ever selecting this character. In fact, apparently within the fighting game community, it is reportedly seen as a taunt when playing alpha games for another player to choose to use Dan against their opponents, as they are then seen to be intentionally handicapping themselves to taunt their foes. Just like Dan himself is known to do, I guess. But due to his comedy value, the character himself seems to be liked amongst the gamers. While on the surface he may look like another palette swap Ken, he is differentiated further by the usage of his trademark ineffective special moves in combat, such as the Gadouken, aka the self-taught fist that functions as a comically short-range projectile attack. He also executes a move he calls the Dankyu-Kyaku, a triple-hitting flying kick that is easy to block that is reminiscent of special attacks within Art of Fighting. Further to this, he can also perform the Koryuken, mimicking the Shoryuken, but with very little horizontal range in comparison to the masters of the move. Perhaps his most memorable move though is the Premium Sign, an attack where he autographs a portrait of himself then flings it at his opponents. A manoeuvre that basically gives a great indication of Dan's own self-image. Prior to the events of the Street Fighter Alpha games, Dan's life was actually slightly more tragic than his comedic appearance may let on. Dan was the son of a skilled martial artist known as Go Hibiki, an athlete and rival of Sagat. In a fight between Sagat and Go would be the one to gouge out Sagat's right eye in a contest, causing Sagat to beat him to death in retaliation to the injury he had inflicted. Now fatherless, Dan would spend his life training in order to seek revenge against the man he held responsible for the death of his father. During this training, Dan would spend periods in Guken's dojo, the same location where Ryu and Ken would train, which explains some of the combat style similarities. Sadly for Dan though, he would end up being expelled from the school upon the teacher learning that his motivations for training were revenge, rather than of pure intention. This did not, however, stop Dan building on the base knowledge he had originally acquired from his father and later at the school, with Dan ultimately self-teaching himself going forward, which is how the so-called strongest style was born. The Alpha series spotlights his quest for revenge against the Muay Thai giant. While we do not learn a great deal about Dan in the first Alpha game, due to him being a secret character, in Street Fighter Alpha 2 during his travels, Dan encounters Final Fight's Guy, who openly mocks Dan, referring to his moves as cute. The two have a match which occurs during Guy's training journey that occurred after the events of Final Fight and simultaneously at the same time as the second Final Fight game story was taking place. Eventually Dan gets his wish of fighting against Sagat, resulting in the cocky Dan taunting him, proclaiming he is going to make his left eye match his right. Here Sagat mentions that the man who took his other eye paid with his life, which leads to Dan angrily branding Sagat as a murderer, revealing himself as the son of the man that Sagat had killed previously. Sagat threatens that Dan will be soon to join his father, which leads to a fight between the two. As we know, there is an extreme fighting skills gap between the likes of the self-taught Dan and the disciplined Muay Thai champion Sagat, but somehow in this fight Dan manages to pull off a victory, achieving his life goal in the process. In his ending, with his father now avenged, Dan declares himself the greatest fighter on earth, and satisfied with avenging his father, only feels it is right to open up a dojo in Hong Kong, so that he, the master, can teach others the strongest style of martial arts. Unbeknownst to all of this though, the only reason that Dan defeated Sagat was due to choosing to throw the match. You see, in between the time Sagat killed Go Hibiki and fought against Dan, years had passed and much had changed for Sagat. For example, in the events of the first Street Fighter game, Ryu would rip his chest open, leading to him seeking revenge against the Hadouken throwing maniac. In their rematch, Sagat manages to defeat Ryu, but would believe Ryu chose to hold back, realising that Sagat was still injured from their first encounter. This incident led to Sagat having an epiphany that living for revenge was foolish and pointless, which would lead him to choosing to lose against Dan to free him of his thirst for revenge too. Dan's story in Street Fighter Alpha 3 chronicles Dan's life after his life-changing victory against Sagat. Now cockier than ever before, Dan's new quest in life is to achieve absolute perfection. In Alpha 3 he meets with his friend Sakura, who asks him to accompany her to Ken's birthday celebration, as there will be lots of important fighters there, and she would like to become acquainted with them. The reason why Dan would be of great assistance to her at this event is due to the fact that Dan had previously told her he could speak many foreign languages, being able to speak perfect Japanese, English, Thai, Cantonese, French, Russian and many more. Dan agrees to accompany her, but only if she becomes his student, so that she can learn how to fight using the strongest style. Sakura reluctantly agrees, and after she has left the scene, Dan screams to his father in the heavens that he finally has his first ever pupil. Through the game, Dan meets Chun-Li, who questions him about Shadaloo, leading to the pair getting into a fight, with Dan eventually fleeing. Eventually, Dan encounters Sagat once more. No longer seeking revenge, instead Dan now wants to help Sagat become a better fighter, even going as far to making him the offer to take him under his wing as one of his students, but Sagat politely declines. At the end of a Dan playthrough, he encounters M. Bison. Now realising what the confrontation with Chun-Li was all about, if you play as Dan, Bison first sets Balrog on players, before ultimately having to face the dictator himself. When victory is achieved, Dan turns Bison's Psycho Drive plant into his new dojo, where he trains with another friend he has made along the way, Blanca. Comically though, none of this ends well for Dan, as Charlie's flight squad bomb the base, destroying Dan's latest building acquisition. Fortunately, Dan and Blanca escape, with him later going on to train Sakura, with her going along with it in the hopes that at Ken's party that she will finally meet Ryu. Building on the Alpha series further, Dan would also be featured in Street Fighter Alpha the animation, and appears in scenes fighting both Vega and Birdie. In both matches he is comically brutally defeated, illustrating his true fighting capabilities. Dan would not show up as a playable character in either the Street Fighter EX games nor Street Fighter 3 titles, however he did make a fair few crossover video game appearances throughout the mid to late 90s into the early 2000s. In a humorous fashion, the first of these would be in X-Men vs Street Fighter, where he makes a cameo in Apocalypse's stage due to apparently becoming captured by the villain. As a playable fighter, he would be selectable in the next game Marvel Superheroes vs Street Fighter, before resurfacing in Marvel vs Capcom 2. In Marvel Superheroes, in his ending, he's about to finish off Akuma before he is interrupted by his sister. Amusingly, he is also in Akuma's ending himself, with Dan wearing remains of Apocalypse's armour, claiming he has changed and can now defeat him. Akuma defeats him easily, leaving him yelping in pain. In an amazing twist of fate, SNK would choose to make Dan a playable fighter in their own crossover fighting game, SNK vs Capcom SVC Chaos. A game it felt that Dan was destined to be a part of. Hilariously, his pre-match dialogue with various SNK fighters see them mistaking him for Robert Garcia, much to Dan's annoyance. Dan would also appear in Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, a chibi Capcom puzzle game. This version of Dan would of course show up in Pocket Fighter as well, with his story depicting him wanting to expand his school, choosing Sakura as his student. Sakura masters the strongest style in no time at all, resulting in her writing a letter to Dan letting him know she had purposely chosen to forget it all, referring to his moves using a term I don't think we're allowed to say on this platform. LOL. In terms of canon Street Fighter game story appearances, Dan's next appearance after Alpha 3 would be within the Street Fighter 4 games. Street Fighter 4 is obviously set following the events of Street Fighter 2, so within the game Dan expresses extreme annoyance that he was not told about the second World Warrior tournament taking place, so missed out on the entire thing. He questions his friend Blanca, who obviously was in the tournament, asking him if the crowd got bored to tears without his presence and star power to provide any real action. It transpires that Blanca actually did invite him to the tournament, but could not get hold of him due to Dan failing to pay his phone bills, leading to his telephone obviously being cut off. Since Street Fighter 2, it also turned out that Dan has been lying to Sakura, telling her that Ryu managed to win the tournament only due to being a student of his. He does inform her though that she will likely be able to meet him at the Sin tournament, a competition he will be entering himself to promote the popularity of his strongest style. Keeping to his word, Dan enters just about sneaking in, scraping through on enough points to qualify at the last minute. After fighting in the tournament, at the end of the game he is shown in a panic trying to run away from all of the explosions in the Sin base, bumping into Blanca in the process. He is saved by Ryu and Sakura but tells them to be more careful, as even with his awesome powers they may not be able to survive another wave. In later iterations of the game, Super and Ultra Street Fighter 4, Dan is looking to capitalise on his martial arts skills further, so broadcasts advertisements on television in an attempt to gain more students for his school. At the end of a playthrough, Dan is shown in tears on the floor of his dojo, realising that not one person has turned up. Sakura though points out it would have probably helped if the commercials featured the dojo's address, with Dan screaming, realising his dumb mistake. Dan would go on to appear in Street Fighter 5, but not until Season 5 of the game's DLC. In the game's arcade mode's ending, he can be seen defeating G, with Dan even helping him back to his feet after the fight. Following these events, Dan uploads a video of himself training G, Blanca, Sagat, Gil, Bison and others as students at his dojo. However, it is soon revealed that all of this is just a Dan delusion, following an easy defeat at the hands of G. In his character story, he is still seeking students for his dojo, but while at the Capcom Plaza learns of the Blanca-chan dolls, merchandise that Blanca has created in his own image that has made him hugely popular. After a short conversation with Sakura, he decides that he wants to meet up with Blanca to discuss an idea, but needs to borrow money from Sakura to do so. After meeting up and sparring with Blanca, Dan decides that he wants to mass produce his own line of dolls in order to draw attention from teenagers around the world so that they join his dojo, bringing his odd little DLC story arc to a close. Amusingly in the game, he also appears in Rashid's story, expressing excitement that he has finally paid his phone bill. Further to this, he also regularly breaks the fourth wall, referring to Alex as being from Street Fighter 3. Outside of the games we've already mentioned, Dan would also appear in Sentinel's End in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and appears in the debut trailer for Street Fighter Cross Tekken, where he is comically shown being badly beaten up by Kazuya. While not being selected to become a playable character in the game, he shows up in Blanca and Sakura's ending, where he has been clumsily trapped in Pandora's box. Dan also cameos in Street Fighter Cross Mega Man, but not as an enemy to fight like other roster members, but instead as a practice target anytime Mega Man receives a new weapon. Dan would also show up as a primary spirit in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. As a clear nod to his joke character status, Dan is noticeable for having the lowest stats amongst all the spirits at level 99. Although not being as prolific in the world of fighting games as perhaps some of the other Street Fighter characters, there is no denying that he has made his mark. From his roots of existing simply to mock SNK, to his more fleshed out character today, Dan has become a popular fan favourite over time, and is certainly one of the more beloved fighters who debuted in Alpha. These days, I would go as far to say that Dan has slowly become the Mr. Satan of the Street Fighter franchise, with his cockiness, overconfidence and fluke victories leading to him believing that he is truly one of the best fighters on earth, even if he does forget to pay his phone bill. For these reasons, Dan has earned a place in the hearts of many fighting game fans, and with his Sagat Revenge arc, it is a lot more layered than many people would expect too. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the at times hysterical story of Dan Hibiki. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to let me know down in the comments section which Street Fighter character you would like me to spotlight next. And if you are yet to see my previous episodes in this series, be sure to check out my Street Fighter characters playlist. Make sure you subscribe to my channel for bi-weekly in-depth video game content like this, which in part is made possible due to the lovely people who back what I do on Patreon. So huge thank yous in this regard go out to Sebastian Villas, The Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heo Paulo Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Haradine, Corey Imar Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Ron Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Namph, Azure Archive, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Angel Light 85, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Aaron McNamara, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Michael Hall, Wesley Sang He, Felatio, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Blaming Renee, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, Dan Van Damme, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bale, Chris Fisk, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Sid Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazansky, Alex Summers, Gunther Hendricks, and everybody else who backs me on the Patreon platform. Very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Cheerio.